What if you could distill the essence of a delicious smoky Texas-style brisket into conveniently sized sausage form? A sausage that has a jet black crunchy bark, a smoke ring, and delicious juicy fatty meat that explodes with flavor in your mouth. That's the dream that I wanted to make reality in this video, and I did. Wow. The first step to making any good sausage is getting the fat to lean meat ratio right. So I'm cubing up my brisket meat and fat separately so I know what percentage of fat I'm going to get in the final product. If I add too much fat, the proteins in the meat won't bind properly, and I'll get a crumbly sausage that kind of tastes like a sack of liquid fat. And if I add too little, I'll get a dry sausage, which nobody likes. So as a general rule, I go with a 15 to 30% fat ratio, depending on how lean the meat is. For example, if I'm making venison sausage, which is super lean, I'll add 30% pork fat, so a lot of pork fat. If I'm making pork and beef sausages with lean meat from the store, I'll go with 20 to 25% fat. And in this case, I'm working with chunks of prime and Wagyu brisket with a ton of intramuscular fat in them, so I'll go with just 15% fat added. And in this recipe, 15% fat works out to 3 pounds of ground fat to 17 pounds of brisket meat. After chopping the meat and fat, it goes in the freezer for an hour to get nice and cold before it goes into the grinder. Keeping everything cold is important for food safety, but also to prevent the fat from smearing and to ensure the grinder cleanly slices the meat fibers to encourage protein bonding when everything comes together. Next, I'm starting with the meat grind and adding 10% water by weight, which works out to 2 pounds of water. The water is ice cold because everything needs to stay super cold as you mix it. You're probably noticing a trend here. Keeping everything cold at this stage is important again for food safety, but most importantly to prevent that dreaded fat smearing. Now I'm adding in my salt and spices, which is comprised of 4.8 ounces of kosher salt, 2.4 ounces of Lowry's, and 1 ounce of black pepper. How did I come up with that? Well, as a rule of thumb, I like my sausage with 2% salt by weight, so 4.8 ounces of kosher salt and 2.4 ounces of Lowry's seasoned salt works out to just about that. The goal is to get the meat batter to coat and kind of encapsulate the cold chunks of fat, as opposed to having a bunch of liquid, kind of rendered and smeared fat that coats the meat fibers. It's important that these meat fibers are touching each other and not blocked by a bunch of smeared fat, because we want the proteins in the beef to connect and bond with each other properly. That's going to help me get a really firm end product that doesn't crumble. Now you'll know the batter is cold enough if your hands hurt as you mix it. If your hands don't hurt from the cold after a few minutes, then it's probably not cold enough. One thing that helps is wearing cotton gloves under nitrile gloves as you mix, because it prevents heat transfer and prevents the batter from warming up, and it also keeps your hands warm. A win-win that I didn't do here for some reason. After mixing the spices and salt in with the meat and adding the fat, I take a little patty and I cook it on top of the stove. Then I'll taste it to see if it needs more spices. In this case, I'm just testing it for saltiness and pepperiness because that's all that's really in it, and it tasted pretty good to me. If it didn't taste good, I'd add more salt or pepper to the batter until it tastes just right. Now the batter goes into the fridge, and I'm soaking the casings in water to remove the packing salt. These are going to sit for an hour while I go outside to fire up my Oklahoma Joes. I wanted to see if I could pack even more brisket flavor in these sausages, so I'm smoking some chunks of fat until they're rendered smoky and kind of crispy, and then I'm taking half the batter and adding some of these chunks and smoked fat to the sausage just to test them out. I don't know if it'll add anything, but we'll find out later. Now moving on to stuffing the sausage. I loaded my water stuffer with 7 pounds of the batter, and I set the flow of the water so that the piston slowly pushes the batter into the casings. That lets me have both hands free to make sure the casings are getting filled properly and don't burst and don't get underfilled, which is why I really love this water stuffer. And after stuffing the casings, I'm twisting the links counterclockwise for one link, and then clockwise for the next, and then counterclockwise, and so on. and I'll do this so they don't unwind as I twist subsequent links. Then I'm snipping the links and moving on to the next step. This is where things get creative. I wanted to replicate the jet black crunchy bark of a Texas-style brisket on these sausages, so I'm mixing a bowl of eggs, and in another bowl I'm adding panko crumbs and a teaspoon of charcoal powder. Don't let this freak you out. Charcoal powder is in all kinds of rubs these days, like Hardcore Carnivore Black, Sure Shot Sids, the list goes on. I'm just going straight to the source and using pure charcoal powder here as an ingredient. From what I've read about it, it's safe to eat in small quantities, but I'm not an expert in any way, so if you guys feel uncomfortable about it, do your own research and make your own decision. You do you. Now I'm dipping a sausage in the eggs, and then I'm coating them in the panko crumbs, and so on with each sausage. Now they already look pretty jet black and barky like a smoked brisket, but they still need to get cooked and smoked. So moving outside to the smoker, I'm using Big Beefy Luigi, my Yoder trailer smoker, to smoke these sausages. I'm cooking some briskets on it already, so I thought, why not switch over to this one? They're going to smoke until they hit about 165 internal or higher, and then they're coming off the smoker to get sliced by the host of this show, me. My name is Steve, by the way, and if you guys like this kind of creative barbecue content and want to join a community of barbecue geeks like me, then consider joining my Patreon page. I'll link it in the description section below. I hope to see you guys there, but without further ado, let's get to the taste test. All right, let's give these a taste. This is the regular one that I made. It doesn't have those brisket chunks in it. It's got a nice smoke ring. The sausage looks amazing. It's juicy. The bark looks awesome. It looks like brisket bark. Wow, that's good. You know, I'm surprised how much it tastes like brisket. It tastes almost exactly like a brisket slice. And then it's got this extra outer layer of that crunchiness from the panko breading. Okay, let's try the one with the smoky fat chunks in it. Can't really see any fat chunks here, but it's a little bit more smoky. A little bit more smoky.